Welcome to Edmonton, everyone, and welcome to your Unifor Prairie Regional Council 2026. Yeah. Before I begin, there's some special guests here from Unifor's National Executive Board and members of the senior staff team that I would like to introduce. Our National President, Lana Payne, is here with us today. Lana is someone who's been leading the charge on the fight against U.S. trade threats, and I know she'll have lots of updates for us on many things later today, so welcome, Lana. Our Unifor National Secretary-Treasurer, my good friend Len Poirier, is here today. Len is a partner in the work and a partner in the work in ways that often don't make it into the report, so I'm glad you made the trip, and thank you very much, Len. And also, I should point out for all of you, there are tables outside, including tables from the Finance Department. Make sure you get out and speak to all of the folks there, get some great information. Now, the person who had to travel the farthest, and it's appreciated, my friend Jennifer Murray, our Atlantic Regional Director, is here, all the way from the East Coast. I know we can always count on Jennifer to be there for our members in the Atlantic and across the Union. And of course, our Ontario Regional Director, Samia Hashi, has also traveled to be here, and I'm so glad she's here. So glad when Ontario comes to the prairies. It's a reminder, like Guy said, that we're all one big union. And speaking of that, I was just in Quebec City last week with leadership visiting with our Quebec Director, my friend Daniel Cloutier. We had a wonderful council, and he has a great team out there as well. And we also have some other important guests here from the NEB. Ken Anderson is here representing skilled trades, somewhere in the room I can't see. Emily Heikoop representing educational, technical, and office professionals. And Les McDonald representing retirees on the NEB. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you for coming. And we have the senior leadership administration team here as well. Lana's Chief of Staff, Roxanne Dubois, Len's Executive Assistant, Sari Saranen, are both here. Please thank them for coming. And we have a number of assistants to Lana, Tim Mitchell, Kellyanne Orr, Jean-Stéphane Mayer, and Tim Mitchell. Oh, Tim Mitchell twice are here. There you go, Tim, you're twice. Give them a round of applause as well. And John Aman and Catherine Fortier, the senior directors. I want to specifically thank all of them because everything in the union is about a team, and we couldn't do this without us all working together. So thank you, everyone, for making the trip. And now I'll tell you about what's going on in the Western region. 4 provinces, and one of the chairs is not here today. That's our BC Regional Council Chair, Leanne Marsh. She's very hard at work out there. There's lots of critical issues. But I also want to thank my friend Guy. You know, Guy talks about Ottawa. I was with Guy in Ottawa, and we worked together with all of the National Executive Board to lobby MPs to protect Canadian jobs. I think we ended up doing 12 meetings with Prairie MPs in 2 days. There were some interesting meetings, have some good stories to tell you, but thank you, Guy, for your support and your hard work, Guy, for your local, your region, and your union. Thank you very much, brother. And I also have to give thanks to the entire Prairie Regional Council Executive and my assistant, Terry Rowland, and the huge team of support staff helping here. Please give all of them a round of applause as well. Now, for those of you who have heard my reports before, as I usually say, I get the privilege and honor to report out to you. But as always with our union, it's nothing but a team effort. You'll see in your kits a staff report, and I strongly encourage you to read the amazing work that's being done by our departments and our service staff, and they all deserve our thanks also for the amazing work they do every day. We've seen continued incredible bargaining activity for thousands of members. We've expanded our efforts to organize new members in places like our first Amazon certification and in energy and aviation organizing right here in the prairies. We did this while facing down the grave threat to our jobs and our sovereignty amid hostile trade actions by the U.S. against us, and frankly, it seems the whole world. Thousands of workers have lost their jobs, and more lose them daily as the wounds continue to compound. And as a result, the old world has been ripped apart, and decades of norms of decency and cooperation have been badly, but hopefully not fatally damaged in the process. But our gains aren't coming easy. They're taking fights, tough fights. And as you all know in this room, you have to fight for every single nickel that you bargain. But we know from our own experiences, time and time again, that fighting back truly makes a difference. On April 28th was just yesterday. It was the day of mourning to remember workers killed or injured on the job. We had a leadership meeting yesterday and a ceremony to mark the occasion, but I think it's important we talk about it today as well. Peter Lesurf was a DHL driver from Local 4050, and he was one of the fatalities in early 2025. Sean McKim and Keith Gordon and Sam Brower and Simon Gagnon and Tyrone McLeod were other Unifor workers who lost their lives last year. We just seen a horrible injury to a worker at our Labatt plant here in Edmonton in the past few weeks. A young member from a pulp mill in Port Alberni was injured so badly in the last few weeks that they had to be placed in a medically induced coma. It's not just the workers who suffer, it's their co-workers who are often first to the scene or working as part of emergency response teams. It's the family, the extended family, everyone on the job site, everyone in the local, and everyone in these often small communities. The post-traumatic stress of these incidents profoundly affects many of us, and these are also injuries in their own way. And even today, we know that physical injuries are reported at far higher rates than psychological injuries. But who benefits? The employer, for their failure to do everything possible to make it sure that every single worker comes home safe every day. And as I mentioned, Unifor Local 892 member Tyrone McLeod was killed late last year. He worked in the Mosaic K3 potash mine near Esterhazy, Saskatchewan, and he worked as a miner operator. Lana and I were both in that mine last year, and many of you might remember me holding up a piece of potash. Tyrone was a valued and active member of the local union, and he's survived by two daughters, Bailey and Hunter, and their mother, Carissa. We were all deeply saddened by the tragic news, and of course extend our deepest sympathies and solidarity with his loved ones and all Local 892 members. The fall of ground incident has been completed and submitted to the mines inspector for review and recommendations. We learned quite quickly that the laws and regulations are insufficient for the protection of our members and the investigation of serious incidents. But rest assured that Unifor will fight for justice for Tyrone, and under no circumstances will we allow his death to be brushed aside. Dan Bailey, our national rep representing Local 892, represented all of us in the Saskatchewan legislature yesterday as they read the names of the deceased into memory, including our brother Tyrone. So please stand if you're able for a minute of silence to remember all of those who passed and those who are still fighting to recover. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. It's great to be back in Edmonton, though. So before I get into what's happening on the ground across these three provinces, I want to name a thread that runs through all of it. Over the past year, across three provinces, we decided to act instead of waiting. We're not going to wait for the fight to come to us. We instead chose to build, to prepare, to find allies, and to make our movement stronger. I'm going to tell you about the impact of those choices and the challenges we face as we keep building our movement together. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Alberta, right now, it's ground zero for protecting workers' rights in this country. Alberta is where the stakes and attacks on workers are the highest, and Alberta is where we're putting in real resources, real time, and real skin in the game. This is not a fight over ideology. It's a fight for our basic rights as workers. The UCP under Daniel Smith is not just a bad government for workers. Based on the facts, based on their record, they are an actively hostile, anti-worker government that has spent years deliberately dismantling the rights that workers in this province have spent decades building. Instead of building and growing a thriving province, we see attempts to sow division everywhere. The distractions, the referendums, the sovereignty threats, the culture war noise. These are designed to keep workers looking in the wrong direction while their rights disappear and their paychecks never seem to get ahead. But I can assure you this, Unifor is not going to be distracted. We are going to stay focused on the real prize. And the real prize is the next Alberta provincial election, where we have a real chance to replace this anti-worker government with a new government that listens to and works with workers. We've done it in BC. We've done it in Manitoba. We've come closer in Saskatchewan than ever before, and we're only a whisker away in the last election in Alberta. In fact, the last time I was in this building was a number of years ago, the last night when Rachel Notley lost. That was a grim election. But the last election we came much closer, and this time we're going to get it done. I know we're going to get it done together. Alberta NDP leader Naheed Nenshi will be here with us this week. Naheed has been doing the work, the hard, unglamorous work of rebuilding the Alberta NDP and listening to Albertans across the province who are frustrated, who are worried, and who are ready for something better. I can tell you firsthand, he drives the UCP and its online troll army absolutely nuts, and he endures the most racist, vile attacks. But what I can tell you about Naheed is this. He understands that slogans don't win elections. Organization wins elections. Doors knocked wins elections. Trained, motivated, credible candidates in communities across Calgary and across the province, that wins elections. And that is what we are building together. The next Alberta election is the one that matters, and it is the only mechanism that will throw Danielle Smith out. And it is also the only thing that stops these separatist impulses from continuing to distort Alberta's image, damage investment in Alberta, and eat up political oxygen. Oxygen that should be going to the real issues that workers face: wages, safety, the right to bargain, the right to strike. So I want to put the UCP record on the table. Not my opinion of it, the actual record. Because some of our members have been told, this is all just politics. This is not about politics. It's about what has actually been done to workers in this province with names and bill numbers attached. The UCP and their MLAs passed Bill 47 during COVID, stripping away the health and safety protections this province had fought for decades, changing the right to refuse. They gutted safety training requirements and cut injured worker benefits right in the middle of a pandemic. They then passed Bill 32, deliberately interfering between local unions and their members, restricting how locals can spend your dues, as if there is some distinction in a dues dollar between core and non-core work. All of our work is core union business. This bill also weakened overtime and arbitration provisions in ways that have handed employers leverage at the bargaining table ever since. The UCP also passed the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act, a law that can be used to criminalize strike action and lawful picketing. And that was passed directly in the aftermath of the co-op refinery lockout in Regina and our successful secondary picketing in Carsland. Not a coincidence. And they recently attacked the Alberta Teachers Association. And let me be clear exactly what they did. They didn't just order the teachers back to work. They stripped their right to strike. They stripped their rights to local bargaining. They imposed the government's own previous proposals as the new contract. They levied fines of $500 per day per teacher and $500,000 per day for the Alberta Teachers Association if they dared to fight back. And then they wrapped the whole thing in the notwithstanding clause to shut the courts out entirely. They also let CUPE education workers, support workers, freeze on the picket lines for 9 weeks last winter. And our members in the education support sector had to endure a government lackey lurking in the background at every bargaining table while they tried to hammer out a deal. Our members in education support face increasing cutbacks and low wages and increasing threats to their safety and increasing violence. And things aren't turning around under this government at all. In fact, they're only getting worse. Because these decisions have consequences, and ultimately they hurt kids as staff are burned out, underpaid, and even afraid to come to work. I could go on in detail for a long time about the UCP policies hurting workers and their families and communities, but I will sum it up by saying they've also made sure to drive Alberta to have the lowest minimum wage in Canada. And as you know, when you go to bargain, low comparator wages puts downward pressure on wages above the floor and makes every single contract harder to win. So brothers, sisters, siblings, this is the UCP record. This is Danielle Smith's actual track record. So I'm happy to take up that debate about this government's record on worker rights. I will take up that debate on any shop floor, in any union hall, at any meeting, at any time. Because every delegate in this room needs to be able to strongly criticize the UCP government without fear against anyone who pushes back. because this is just simply wrong. It's wrong. Now, we don't need to agree on everything as workers, but wherever you are on the political spectrum, as trade unionists, we all agree on the fundamentals: the right to organize, safe workplaces, fair arbitrations, good faith bargaining, and of course the right to strike. These are fundamentals, trade union fundamentals, and the UCP record on the facts is nothing short of disgraceful. But I can promise you this: instead of being distracted and divided, we are going to focus on those fundamentals, the fundamentals that unite us as workers, and we are going to make sure that we throw this disgraceful government into the dustbin of history where it belongs. Now, I also want to address something directly, and I know there are some in the private sector who are confused, and they'll say, the notwithstanding clause is a public sector problem. It's not our problem. It's for those pesky government unions, those public sector workers. It's not against us. Have you heard this before? I want to clear up any confusion because it's such a critical divide and rule argument used by the right wing to confuse workers. The notwithstanding clause under Section 33 of the Charter, that's not limited to the public sector. What governs its use is government action, and you're going to hear more from this later today from Jim Stanford. Governments can legislate against any workers, public or private, when they choose to spin something as being in the public interest. The Supreme Court of Canada has established that the right to strike and the right to meaningful collective bargaining are constitutionally protected rights for all workers. So when any government passes laws that removes or restricts those rights, the Charter has an impact, regardless of whether the workers involved are teachers, nurses, dock workers, postal workers, or oil sands workers. The use of a notwithstanding clause allows the government to say, we don't care. Even if a court finds that we violated your charter rights, even if a judge rules, in fact, that they did act unconstitutionally, they made sure that they're allowed to do it anyway. Now, I want you to think about what that could mean here in Alberta for your Unifor local bargaining. Let's take an oil refinery, for example. Let's say the members had voted to strike and they're out on the line. Maybe the company even locked them out. Many of our employers and government talk all the time. And instead of bargaining, they spend their time telling the government how bad the problem is that they created, just like DHL did last summer. So after listening to the employer, a future UCP government could pass a law imposing the company's last offer, levying heavy fines against the local and every individual member who defies this new law, and they could shut down any court challenge by using the notwithstanding clause. Any employer, public or private, knowing the government will ride to their rescue, has no real incentive to bargain. The right to strike becomes theoretical. The chilling effect on every negotiation in this province is immediate and permanent. This was actually recognized in Ontario a few years ago, and our union was at the forefront of it. The Doug Ford government acted to preemptively legislate CUPE education support staff workers back to work. Sound familiar? After CUPE education workers stated that they would defy the new law, our union and many others stepped up with a real threat of a general strike. We would stand beside those who were already standing up for themselves and stand up for the right to strike. And it worked. Doug Ford blinked and he backed off. But sadly, in Alberta, the teachers were the ones who blinked, and they were facing a terrible law, and they chose not to fight and went back to work. But anyone who believes this government will stop at teachers is not paying attention to what they've done to others already. This government has already shown they're prepared to use the notwithstanding clause whenever they feel like it, and they've moved from demonizing trans people with it to now getting ready to make immigrants their next scapegoat. The pattern with this UCP government is clear. The only question is whether we're going to respond like it's clear. Because solidarity is one reason to care about what happened to the teachers, but the direct threat to our own bargaining tables is another. We cannot afford to let misinformation circulate on this point, so I'm asking every delegate here to take this important information back that you learned today about the notwithstanding clause, about what the UCP record is, and make sure we have these conversations so that we can correct misinformation and throw out this government. And of course, we have the referendums. the referendums that Danielle Smith has set for this fall. I noticed last week that Danielle Smith thought it was a great idea to waste public money creating YouTube videos about how we should all vote yes to their latest attempt to divide and rule. You know, I want to say something simple here. I think it's important, and I think it reflects where most Albertans actually are, including most of our members. I'm going to start with my own story, and I know there are millions more. I immigrated to Calgary from Ireland in the early 1980s. I went to elementary school here, Mother Teresa Elementary. I lived in Ontario and I finished elementary school there. And somehow I ended up graduating high school in Calgary at a school represented by our amazing members in Unifor Local 1990, a school that's now called Our Lady of the Rockies. But for the past few decades, I've lived in BC. And in this role, serving our members in my federal work, I've seen this country from many different angles. And I can tell you, I love every bit of it. The simple fact that Danielle Smith wants us all to forget that we live, grow, and work across borders, cities, communities, and even countries can't be forgotten that easily. Because we all have one simple thing in common that binds us. We love Alberta. We love Canada. And those two things are not in conflict. The referendums are not simply about Alberta's legitimate interests. They're about distraction. They're a calculated attempt to stoke grievance and division so workers stop asking questions that threaten this government's hold on power. Questions like, why do we have the lowest minimum wage in Canada? Why have health and safety rights been dismantled? Why does this government legislate against its own people when they try to bargain? Why is there a provincial government rep sitting at every school board bargaining table? That's the questions we should be putting to a referendum. So our answer to the referendums this fall must be based on UCP accountability, not scapegoating. Because Alberta's problems, the cost of living, the housing crisis, the pressure on families, these aren't caused by Ottawa. They're not caused by other provinces. They're caused by policy choices made right here by a UCP government that has consistently chosen the interests of corporations over the interests of workers and families. So we will develop a campaign response to these referendums, working with the PRC Executive and our Political Action Committee. But the message is simple and the frame is clear, and we should sing it from the rooftops. We are for Alberta. We are for Canada. We are for workers. We are not for cheap political theatre designed to avoid accountability. And as I've mentioned before, I also sit on the Federal Sustainable Jobs Partnership Council, appointed by Order in Council to represent workers in the conversation about the future of work and supporting workers through change and making sure that workers are always at the table. Our council has a mandate to listen to workers across the country because corporations advise governments constantly. They have lobbyists in Ottawa every single day. We bumped into some of them when we were there. They have direct access to ministers over and over. Sometimes that aligns with workers' interests, most times it doesn't. The Sustainable Jobs Partnership Council was created to ensure that workers have a seat at the table, not just employers and environmental groups. Our first report from the Council was issued late last year, and it argues any transition in any economic sector has to work for the workers in it. Because we deal with change every day. But any loose talk of change must come with real dollars for retraining, real income support, real timelines, and real respect for the communities built around our industries. When the government's Sustainable Jobs Plan was tabled in Ottawa this spring, our council released an independent public statement critiquing this government for a lack of no new money or programs. Because despite all the ribbon cutting and news announcement, you don't build a just transition by leaving the people who built the industry to figure it out on their own. And I join with Guy and other members in Ottawa lobbying on Protect Canadian Jobs with plenty of examples. We're going to keep making the case that workers deserve real dollars, real plans, real support, and a real seat at the table. And we are certainly going to make sure that our voice is louder than the corporate lobby in shaping what comes next. But I am proud of something. I do want to tell you something we've accomplished a few weeks ago here in Calgary, because it represents months of relationship building. It shows what's possible when we stop waiting for the perfect conditions and start building for action. After the teachers' dispute last year I told you about, I sat in difficult conversations with leaders across the Alberta labour movement. The decision by the teachers to return to work in the face of that draconian law shaped all the discussion from the outset. Those conversations were honest and sometimes uncomfortable. The discussions revealed real divisions, not just about will, but about capacity, about planning, about whether we had what it takes to mount the kind of sustained campaign Alberta workers need in the face of a government clearly spoiling for a fight. And I came away from those difficult conversations knowing two things. First, we cannot rely on any single flashpoint moment, any single dispute, any general anger at the UCP to build the electoral power we need. It seems so simple to say, but that's because it's true. You don't build an army on the day of the battle. And second, I learned that there were partners ready to do real work instead of simply talk. Scott Lunny, the Steelworkers Regional Director for District 3 in the West, and Raj Uppal, the new CUPE Alberta Director, both told me they were in and wanted practical things we could do to get ready for the election. And so we started talking about what joint preparation would actually look like. 3 weeks ago in Calgary, almost 70 workers sat in a room together. Unifor, Steelworkers, CUPE. Not for a rally, not for a panel, although we will be doing a panel here, for training, door knocking, conversation practice, and how to handle the pushback, how to not flinch, how to unite on worker issues, safety, bargaining, organizing, and the right to strike. 3 unions in one room with one election to win. That's the foundation we're building, and we're not stopping there. We learned campaign fundamentals. We were knocking doors, actually knocking them, and not flinching. We learned how to organize our people and how to sustain that organizing between now and whenever Daniel Smith calls the election. We've already talked with CUPE and the Steelworkers and many other locals, and we are looking at hosting more of those training sessions with more participants and in more communities across this province. We have at least a dozen more names ready to go in Calgary, and we're going to be doing one in Edmonton as well. And we will have help from our union across the country, but we must be ready in Alberta because the burden falls on us to stand up and fight back. So we need your continued strong support. We need you to keep sending those folks. We need you to get that volunteer time in as well, and we need to throw out this government. And in Saskatchewan, in the 2024 Saskatchewan election, Unifor activists did deliver a body blow to Scott Moe's Saskatchewan party. 5 cabinet ministers defeated, 17 MLAs gone. Workers did that. Our members did that. When Carla Becht asked us to stand with her outside the Co-op refinery in Regina during the final days of the 2024 provincial election, it was a key moment. We stood outside Gate 7 with dozens of members from Local 594, workers who know exactly what it means to fight for dignity on the job. Carla made commitments, card check, anti-scab, and we were there to make sure those commitments were tied directly to working people, not just campaign language. And so that set the tone. Last fall, Carla invited us to speak to the Saskatchewan NDP convention in Saskatoon, not just to speak, but to sit on a panel and push the conversation where it needed to go. And of course, I was direct. If you want to win, you don't drift toward vague economic messaging. You anchor yourself in worker issues. You talk about power. You talk about fairness. You talk about how people are getting left behind in an economy that is increasingly stacked against them. I believe that message landed because it reflected what workers are living every day, what all of you see every single day. In November last year, we held a Unifor Regina leadership meeting with leaders from all across Saskatchewan. Leaders reported, and we drilled into key pressure points in the province: labor code reform, workplace safety, enforcement gaps. We've sent in submissions into both the Saskatchewan Labor Code and safety review processes, work that was strengthened by our Prairie Regional Council committees. I was in Saskatchewan this February, and we also saw something important on the ground there: capacity building. I'd like to thank the Unifor Education Department for delivering a spring Pell Super School in Regina. Over 49 participants came through those sessions, and I had the opportunity to speak directly with both classes, to speak to activists who are sharpening their skills, preparing to take on the fights in workplaces and communities. I love to see this, as this is long-term strength being built in real time, because these classes and our education programs are the quiet work that compounds to make a huge difference over time. We also continue to support the community side of the labour movement and congratulate and are happy to help the Local 594's charity skating fundraiser as part of that. I received an invitation last week from the Saskatchewan Party Minister of Labour Relations and Workplace Safety, asking Unifor to participate in their new advisory committee for dialogue on current and emerging issues in labour relations, employment standards and workplace safety, and of course we will participate. But this is not a government that makes this kind of outreach easily or that sets up these committees for no reason. It means that our presence, our submissions, our meetings, our members showing up has been noticed and taken seriously across the aisle, not just by the opposition. And Carla will be here with us this week, and we're planning directly to meet Carla and her team at the legislature this fall and lobby Saskatchewan politicians with worker ideas, not for a courtesy call, to be focused, strategic, and tied to outcomes. We want to see labor code reform, real worker protections, and much stronger safety enforcement. So we'll be organized going in and persistent coming out of it. Now in Manitoba, we said the same thing about a better future, but it's actually turning out to be true. What we've built in Manitoba, it's not just a set of policies, it's a model of what happens when workers organize, engage politically, and stay at the table after the election is over. Manitoba isn't simply a feel-good story. It's what happens when when Unifor decided before the election exactly what we wanted, and then we held the government to account from day one. From day one, we were clear what had to change and how this government could send a strong signal that it was serious about worker rights. So the very first letter I sent to Premier Wab Kinew's office after that election wasn't about access or relationships, it was about results. Card check certification and anti-scab legislation. Restoring fairness in how workers organize. Restoring balance at the bargaining table. And to his credit, Wab didn't hesitate. Wab and his government delivered. And that tells you something important, not just about the policy, but about the kind of government we're dealing with. A government that listens, and more importantly, a government that acts. But of course, we didn't stop there. In 2024, I sat down directly with Frank Wright, our area director, and Chris Santos and Gina Smoke. We sat down with the Manitoba Labour Minister and the legislature, and we pushed on something that every worker understands, but too few governments address: the misuse of sick notes. Workers are being forced to go to a doctor, clogging up the system just to prove that they're sick. And we pushed to change that, and a bunch of other things in that meeting, including paid sick days and pay equity. But now we're seeing legislation tabled as Bill 11 this year in Manitoba that abuse of doctor's notes. It respects workers' dignity and takes the pressure off the healthcare system at the same time. So that's what practical worker-driven policy looks like, having real impact on working people every day. So this is a government that's choosing to tilt the terrain back toward collective bargaining, back toward union density, and back toward worker leverage. And we made sure workers aren't just part of the conversation, they're part of the economic strategy as well. I spent 2025 on the Manitoba-US Trade Council at the invitation of Premier Kinew, bringing workers' voices directly into the discussions about trade, investment, and economic direction. And I can tell you that matters, because if we're not at the table, decisions get made without us, not with us. And you can see the results of that approach in real projects on the ground and some good news for workers with new jobs. Just this March, I was in Winnipeg with Premier Kinew and Minister Melanie Jolie at New Flyer, alongside the leadership and members of Unifor Local 3003. I toured that plant again and saw the expansion, the modernization, the new investment through NFI's True North strategy, a Canadian-built bus. That is real work, that is hundreds of jobs, and that is real industrial capacity being built right here in Canada. Good jobs, good union jobs, the kind of jobs that sustain families and communities. So Wab Kinew and his government have started to stabilize systems that were breaking. They've restored some balance to the workplace, but there is a lot more work to do on wages, on pay equity, enforcement, and on expanding worker power into sectors that are still untouched. Because Manitoba shows what is possible. It can in fact be the model for the whole country. There's a reason that Wab Kinew is the most popular premier in the country. But it's only going to be there if we protect it. So the task in Manitoba, the task in front of us is clear. We have to consolidate what's been won and push for what still needs to be done and get ready early to make sure that in 2027, working people in Manitoba send a clear message: we're not going back. That's what preparation looks like, brothers and sisters and siblings, and there's a recommendation in your kits to support that topic. Now, this is a Prairie Council, so I won't go on for long about BC. However, BC in the north are in the western region as well. And the main thing I want to tell you about BC is that thanks to Unifor efforts on the ground, we've held our NDP majority government now since 2017 against increasingly difficult odds. Forestry workers are hurting right across the country, and there's an important recommendation in your kits on that, but British Columbia has been hit especially hard. I've been serving on the Premier's Economic Security Task Force there and the Softwood Lumber Advisory Council, and although we have succeeded in getting forestry put onto a national table, progress remains slow, the tariffs are huge and growing, and much more needs to be done. And we heard a lot of amazing reports yesterday in our leadership meeting about some of the incredible bargaining going on. It's far too many for me to touch on here, but I'll speak to a couple of examples to give you an idea of what's going on at the table. Because none of this happens without a lot of staff support, from research to legal to communications, our national servicing staff, and those on the ground. I want to also thank our area directors, Mario Santos, Frank Wright, and Phil Belanger, who help keep these many balls in the air. I want to start by congratulating Richard and everyone in Local 594 on ratifying a 3-year first collective agreement late last year at the Co-op Ethanol Complex. We welcome about 40 new members into Local 594. And last summer, our members at DHL across the country and in the prairies showed how to take on a multinational giant and win. DHL manufactured a dispute and then tried to get around the new federal anti-scab law that we all fought for. Many of you will remember that our national anti-scab campaign first launched at a Prairie Regional Council after the co-op refinery lockout. Our members at DHL and in the Prairie stood strong, and when the government finally did the right thing and avoided intervening under Section 107 for once, DHL caved and our members got a new contract. So well done everyone in DHL. The first test of the anti-scab law was also our first national dispute and our first national victory with DHL. And in Saskatchewan, we heard yesterday, the Crowns are ramping up bargaining cycles again. Miners and Esterhazy are at the table already. And there's more updates in the kit, so please grab a copy of those staff reports if you need that, need the reports from the locals, or have any questions, please follow up with us on that. And in organizing, something that's near and dear to my heart, we've seen expanded work by our organizing team into many different successful campaigns over the past year, and more are in the works. In the prairies, organizing is still on fire. Just yesterday, we announced 35 new members were certified from AGI Canadian Company right here in Edmonton. These members are passenger service agents at Edmonton International Airport and perform work for United Airlines and Alaska Airlines. And we currently have applications to certify about 800 WestJet call center workers in Calgary and their crew schedulers, and we feel really good about our chances. And the timing is great for that too, because this is an important step forward for Unifor Local 531 heading into the bargaining table later this year for their next set of negotiations. They are much bigger today than when they were formed with only 531 members, and we certainly hope to add the call center workers and crew schedulers as well. Now, I told you last year, I went back to my remarks, that whether we run through the penalties against Amazon for their behavior or by simply opening the boxes and counting the ballots, that 2025 would be the year that Amazon workers organized with Unifor. And I'm happy to report in July 2025, our union successfully organized over 700 members at the Amazon Fulfillment Centre in Delta, BC, marking the first large victory of its kind in Canada. And while this resulted in increased organizing activity, it also led to increased employer pushback. And after the Labour Board ordered us to go into the Amazon lunchroom to access multiple meetings with employees, they turned around and gave raises in the Lower Mainland to the other major warehouses, but not to our Amazon members at YVR2. And we fought back. I remember being in those lunchrooms and the workers were so upset, and we promised them that their union would not let them down. We swore that we wouldn't leave them behind. And just a few months ago, I'm very happy to report, the BC Labour Relations Board agreed with our complaint. They ruled that Amazon had broken the law again by withholding wage increases from Amazon YVR2 workers. Over 800 workers with over 6 months of back pay, over $3 an hour. We won. This means almost $1 million in compensation for those workers. Hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in back pay per member. We've also applied at Amazon for first contract mediation and using a process under the BC Code that leads to a first collective agreement. And so 2025 was the year we got our first certification. Hopefully, 2026 will finally be the year that we achieve the first collective agreement in North America for Amazon workers, either by agreement or first contract arbitration. So many people have worked to get us to this point, but we can't take our foot off the gas now. Because organizing Amazon, it's not just a campaign, it's a symbol. And it's the beginning of a decade of us working in new industries, and it signals that Unifor is here for the long haul. So please give a round of applause for those brave Amazon workers fighting hard for their first contract. And we've been busy on the recreation front too. We've had many recreation events, either through our recreation committees in Edmonton, Manitoba. The local unions have been doing incredible work. We're looking actually at hosting our first national charity golf tournament here in Edmonton on June the 20th. 100% of the proceeds raised will be allocated to a local charity selected by the PRC Executive. And we are also hosting our third annual Stampede Barbecue in Calgary on July the 8th. Our members work very hard, and it's important to hold events that are fun and create the space to bring their families and meet fellow Unifor members from other job sites. So put those in your calendar, and hopefully we'll see all of you there. Unfortunately, though, intimate partner violence continues to be a devastating epidemic affecting thousands of individuals, families, and communities across Canada. I saw Dawn yesterday, and reminded me of my visit to the Yellowhead Women's Shelter in 2024. It's actually a Unifor represented shelter, and I saw firsthand how great the need is. There's never enough funds, and you would actually be shocked at how many workers are needed, even in a small town like Hinton. And in Saskatchewan, they continue to have the highest rate of intimate partner violence in Canada, with rural and remote areas reporting incidents of 1,984 per 100,000 population. Victims are often left without the assistance they need due to chronic underfunding of shelters, crisis services, and legal resources. And we will continue fighting in every province and federally until we see action that matches the scope of the problem and we see real change to put an end to this terrible epidemic of violence. You'll see also a recommendation in your kits that we are urging Canadians to speak out to defend reproductive rights. Our national campaign, Reproductive Justice Now, supports reproductive rights in Canada. We're demanding that the federal government use its powers more effectively under the Canada Health Act to ensure equitable access to publicly funded sexual and reproductive health services in every single province and territory. We're calling on them to improve access and funding for reproductive care, because unfortunately, these choices are still limited for far too many, and there are still significant barriers to accessing free public abortion services, particularly for marginalized and rural communities. Because the truth remains that there are ongoing and persistent attempts to criminalize abortion here in Canada. We've seen what happened in the States. We need to continue to keep pushing for binding laws and rules that achieve real change. And we also need to keep pushing for real change on the continued prevalence of the shameful gender pay gap. Some believe that transparency legislation is the way to go, but simply being transparent about it is to be naive that employers will feel any real pressure to change. And it takes all of us to push for change. We do have tremendous help from the PRC Women's Committee and the Women's Department, and they held a packed Prairie Regional Conference last October in Calgary. I was there to bring greetings, and I was struck by the incredible level of excitement at the beginning of the conference. And I was actually just out door knocking a few weeks ago with a Calgary MLA who was there, and she was telling me how much that conference fired her up. But at the end of the day, the men must speak up. We must stand with the sisters, because as you can see from just these few points I've mentioned, there is a tremendous amount of work to be done, and it's work that needs to be done by all of us. And last September, we called out some of the prairie provinces on the lack of statutory recognition of September 30th. The federal government, BC and Manitoba, have all recognized National Day for Truth and Reconciliation as a paid holiday, but Alberta and Saskatchewan have done little. We need to push this issue politically and at bargaining tables and make sure these provincial employers wake up and give people the right to have paid time off and learn more about our history on this important day. So I'm asking every local in Alberta and Saskatchewan to make September 30th recognition a bargaining priority in your next round. It's long overdue, and it falls for us to push it. Now, before I wrap up, finally, you're all saying? Before I wrap up, I would like to recognize a colleague in the room who not everyone might know, but I've known for a long time, as long as he's been on national staff. Just got to find my page here. I want to make sure I say something nice, so I don't want to get it wrong here. Where is it? One second. Oh, here it is. Bruce Snow. Bruce Snow is currently an assistant to the president. He has handled many important files for our union, from transportation to aviation to rail. Bruce actually comes from the rail industry, and he was a local president there shortly before he came on staff. I actually met him many years ago on his first day in the New West office. He has spent decades serving our members and our union, and since 2022, he's been working very hard with Lana in the President's office. Bruce is retiring at the end of May, and I won't get a chance to thank him for everything in BC before he retires, so I wanted to make sure we all give him a good round of applause for everything here he has done. I don't know where Bruce is in the room. Somewhere. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for everything, brother. And all the best as you transition to a new chapter. But I also have to stop and take a minute to thank someone who's been around this Prairie Council for a long time. And it will be his last regular meeting of the PRC as an active delegate. This brother has also served on the NEB and as the Energy Council chairperson. Brother Dirk Tolman will be retiring shortly. I'd like to thank him on behalf of all of us for his tireless dedication to his members and the cause. Dirk is very ethically principled, and he speaks softly and with calm determination. Well, maybe with a few F-bombs here and there. Dirk is also determined and passionate, and I've had the pleasure of joining him for I don't know how many lobby meetings in Ottawa and online. We have some funny stories, just like with Guy. I can assure you of that. Dirk, brother, the world is a better place because of your activism, and enjoy what's next. You've earned it. We both know you're not going to stop. Please welcome and thank Dirk for everything he's done for our union. Thank you, everyone. So I want to come back to where we started today. Workers who went to work but didn't come home. And we learned again that the laws meant to protect workers are not sufficient. But that's why this union exists. Not just for the speeches, not just for the conferences or the resolutions, for every worker who goes through a gate in the morning and deserves to come back at the end of their shift with their dignity, their safety, and their paycheck intact. Everything I've described today flows from that. The 70 workers in that room in Calgary learning to knock doors, that's for better health and safety laws and more inspectors. Standing outside Gate 7 in Regina with Local 594, that's for every worker in Saskatchewan who needs a government that actually shows up instead of turning a blind eye to scabs. The letters to Wab Canoe and our lobbying shortly after the ink was dry in that election, that's for every Manitoba worker who was told card check and anti-scab are too much to ask for. The seat I mentioned on the Sustainable Jobs Partnership Council, that's for every energy worker who's been told the transition is coming, whether they like it or not. So we're making sure everyone has a say in what that looks like, because none of this was reactive. All of it was a choice to build before the fight, to organize before the election, to be at the table before the decisions are made. And that choice is not finished. The Alberta election is coming, and we will be ready. The economy is changing, whether we like it or not, and we will be ready. And I know everyone here in the Prairie Council will be ready as well. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get to work, everyone. Thank you very much.